Dear delegates, we're about to begin. If you could please take your seats. The day 2 of the high-level segment is about to begin. Could you please take your seats? Thank you.
all the distinguished heads of state and government, delegates, honored guests, I now open the joint third meeting of COP29, third meeting of CMP19, and third meeting of CMA6. As we continue the national statements, I would like to remind distinguished speakers of the actions in place to ensure effective time management. There is a 3-minute time limit for statements during the high-level segment. Statements should be as concise as possible, noting that full text of the official statements will be made available on the UNFCCC website. And finally, please note that heads of state or government who are not in the plenary at the time for delivery of their statements will be scheduled to speak at the end of all statements of the same category. Dear distinguished heads of state and government, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, let us begin. Please take your seat. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Shaina Ansari Hamadani, Vice President of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
In the name of God, Mr. Chairman, Executive Secretary, honorable leaders and representatives, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to express my gratitude to the government and the people of Azerbaijan for hosting COP29, which would provide an opportunity for inclusive actions with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities to address global crises and challenges arising from climate change. The national sovereignty and priorities are key to address the global climate change challenges and to transform the global energy system. The continue should have equal access to the technologies, knowledge, investment, and nuclear energy in order to increase the share of clean and renewable energy for achieving this goal. Therefore, illegal unilateral sanctions should not impede the efforts of member states in their strives. The illegal unilateral sanctions limits the ability of member countries to access and utilize global financial resources and to develop technology-based equipment. Until these sanctions are completely lifted, expecting adherence to environmental objectives of the Convention is unjustified and irrational. Therefore, I call upon all the member states to condemn these political measures and act on removing these restrictions. Ladies and gentlemen, Iran has taken numerous measures to address climate change threats with further initiatives underway. These include the issuance of general policies related to climate change management and green economy expansion by the highest authority in our country, as well as the inclusion of a national climate change management plan in the country's 7th five-year development plan. Additionally, implementing projects such as converting fossil fuel-based power plants to combined cycle power plants, reducing emissions in the oil and gas industry, expanding renewable solar and nuclear energy, and other similar actions are further effective steps we have taken. Mr. Chairman, We, the member states of the United Nations, have gathered here to address environmental challenges on our planet and to work together to reduce human suffering. But how can we achieve this goal when, in the past year alone, more than 43,000 people, more than half of whom were women, children, and infants, have been killed by the occupying Zionist regime? This is in addition to the recent casualties resulting from the regime's brutal attacks. Who can witness the environmental destruction in the occupied territories and deny its impact on regional and trans-regional climate change? The silence of Western countries maintained by adhering to double standards and selective policies is deeply troubling. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that our shared environment is a common bond and precious heritage for all of us. We hope that international community, free from political issues, will stand together, exchange knowledge, transfer technology, and facilitate accessing financial resources without discrimination and fully lift unilateral sanctions against countries, particularly the Islamic Republic of Iran. However, we cannot forget the fact that the current climate situation of the world is the result of the industrial policies of few developed countries, and developing states shall not be deprived of their right to development because of what others have done. Once again, we emphasize that if this conference should intend to prove its goodwill in striving for a better future for all, while persisting on avoiding double standards to achieve meaningful actions by all countries to achieve these goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome now His Excellency Mr. Joseph Ondaut Ber, Vice President of Gabon. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président de la
President of the Republic, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to express on behalf of the President of Gabon and Head of State, Brice Oligui Nguema, this statement. He's unable to attend because of other commitments, but please accept his very sincere apologies and his wishes for a full success of the meeting. And we also have to discharge a debt by expressing warmest thanks to His Excellency Mr. Ilham Aliyev, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, both in my own name and on behalf of my country, for the very warm welcome and the hospitality extended to myself and my delegation since we arrived. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we meet in Baku, humanity continues to face unprecedented environmental challenges. Indeed, biodiversity loss is quickening, with 70% of wildlife disappearing, and climate change continues with constantly increasing temperature records, and this year the hottest on record. And pollution is spreading around the world, especially with plastics, which is more than 90% of marine pollution. And this affects all countries of the world without exception. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, multilateralism is the only weapon at our disposal in this long and uncertain war. And today we may have the knowledge, so let's use the necessary strategies and resources. The technological terms, first of all, with the deployment of renewable energies and environmental plans with nature-based solutions, and the key role played by our oceans and forests. Your Excellencies, in financial terms, notwithstanding a small drop in 2022, world wealth continues to grow, and we cannot afford to fail, therefore. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Gabonese population is suffering from an increase in sea levels and flooding and rainfall increases. All of this has a lasting effect on the quality of life of our people and exacerbates the conflict between man and nature. And we continue to fight for both. That is why our forestry has remained stable, and we've spared no effort to have major land and marine protected areas. Today, I reassert the profound commitment of my country and our people is devoting 3 days to reconstituting our ecological environmental resources and ecosystems in order to deal with climate change. This demonstrates once again that our narratives internationally must correlate with the national situation. Nonetheless, we won't be able to maintain this commitment unless international solidarity is forthcoming. The survival of the planet depends on our ecosystems and on commitment of countries, given their historic responsibility. And success depends on a more ambitious financial architecture, which means a deep-seated reform of the international financial system for a greener global economy and innovation and flexibility in funding for climate change actions, especially through restructuring of debt. And there needs to be respect for a new and bold NCQG. Your Excellencies, climate change requires collective action based on trust, fairness, and shared responsibilities. Hence, our conviction that we need to go beyond our own interests to give humanity the chance again to show its greatness in the face of global crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure now to welcome His Highness Sheikh Sabah Khaled Al Hamad M Al Sabah, Crown Prince of Kuwait. Your Highness, you have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the merciful, Your Excellency, Mr. President Aliyev of the Friendly Republic of Azerbaijan, Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, Your Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may peace, mercy, and the blessing of God be on all of you. Allow me at the outset to convey the greetings of His Highness the Emir of Kuwait. May God be with him and protect him. I would also like to convey his wishes for the success of the 29th COP. I'm also pleased to say how grateful we are to the Friendly Republic of Azerbaijan for their exemplary organization of this conference. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, there is no doubt that climate change is a global concern and a threat to many countries, and Kuwait is one of them. Indeed, the effects of climate change are showing up in more and more blatant ways, in tangible and accelerated ways. We're seeing a rise in temperature and dust storms, and because of the lack of rain. And these are all phenomena that are impacting the daily lives of our people. And it is in this perspective that Kuwait is aiming for environmental sustainability, and we will be keeping all our commitments under all our agreements, including Kyoto. And through our projects at the national level, this is guaranteed. And within the framework of the Paris Agreement, we will be supporting the two initiatives. That is, they call for a truce, and we invite developed countries to abide by their commitments under the Framework Convention and to offer financial and technical support to LDCs and developing countries and to help them to develop their capacity. This is essential to help them to tackle the effects of climate change and to also implement their nationally determined contributions. Madam Chair, we have the Arab Economic Development Fund managed by Kuwait, and we will spare no effort to support developing countries and support projects to tackle climate change. And in this regard, we have granted over 100 projects, financing for over 100 projects, and by 2050, we will be aligning our economic growth based on a net zero target, and we will step up our resilience to climate change and try to achieve net zero by 2060. This will be through several strategic projects to reduce carbon in all sectors, and we also will be implementing clean energy. We also have the ambition of using 50% of solar energy by 2050 in the electricity sector. And we also are planning to have low carbon energies and technology implemented and to promote sustainable energy. Our objective is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80%. And to do so by 2040. It is our hope that our efforts, along with other countries, will help us all achieve a prosperous future that will be for the benefit of each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Highness. It is my pleasure to welcome His Eminence Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State of the Holy See. Your Eminence, you have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Pope Francis, I extend cordial greetings to all of you and wish to assure you of his closeness, support, and encouragement so that COP29 may succeed in demonstrating that there is an international community ready to look beyond the particularism and to place at the center the good of humanity and our common home, which God has entrusted to our care and responsibility. Efforts should be made in particular to find solutions that do not further undermine the development and adaptive capacity of many countries that are already burdened with crippling economic debt. Indeed, ecological debt and foreign debt are two sides of the same coin, mortgaging the future. And I would like to reiterate an appeal that Pope Francis made in view of the ordinary jubilee of the year 2025, asking the more affluent nations that they may acknowledge the gravity of so many of their past decisions and determined to forgive the debts of countries that will never be able to repay them. More than a question of generosity, this is a matter of justice. It is made all the more serious today by a new form of injustice, which we increasingly recognize, namely that a true ecological debt exists, particularly between the global North and South, connected to commercial imbalances which affects on the environment and the disproportionate use of natural resources by certain countries over long periods of time. Therefore, it is essential to seek a new international financial architecture that is human-centered, bold, creative, and based on the principles of equity, justice, and solidarity. A financial architecture that can truly ensure for all countries, especially the poorest and those most vulnerable to climate disasters, both low carbon and high sharing development pathways. For an ambitious agreement that promotes initiatives and processes aimed at truly inclusive development, we must all take responsibility for safeguarding not only our own future, but that of all. I reiterate the dedication and support of the Holy See, especially in the field of integral ecology education and in raising awareness of the environmental as a human and social problem on any number of levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Eminence. And it is my pleasure now to welcome His Excellency Mr. Andrej Plenković, Prime Minister of Croatia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to stand before you today to address one of the most pressing issues of our time, the urgent need for global action against climate change. Our future depends on how boldly we act today. Croatia is committed to decarbonizing its energy system and accelerating its green transition. With the International Energy Agency warning of an imminent peak in fossil fuels, shifting away from them is not only climate-wise, but an economic necessity. We are doing our part by supporting our neighbors, starting with Bosnia and Herzegovina, to boost climate resilience and strengthen mitigation. Our achievements and investments in renewable energy reflect our dedication. In 2022, renewables made up 29.5% of our energy consumption, a figure that continues to grow. With projects like green hydrogen and geothermal development, we aim for 42.5% renewables by 2030. To manage intermittency sustainability, investment in pumped storage hydropower is crucial, and Croatia has strong potential in this area. Our efforts show that economic growth and environmental responsibility can coexist. Croatia has decoupled its strong growth from CO2 emissions, maintaining a carbon footprint well below the EU average. We are committed to protecting our environment and biodiversity, working to safeguard 30% of the Adriatic Sea under the Global Biodiversity Framework. We extend our energy commitment internationally, exemplified by the Clean Energy for EU Islands initiative launched during our EU Council presidency. We are advancing cutting-edge technology that transforms plastic, textiles, sludge, and non-recyclable biogenic waste into zero-emission hydrogen. This innovation tackles pollution and energy excess while reducing methane emissions. Another crucial area in addressing climate change and adapting it to its impacts is improving energy efficiency in housing. Residential energy use remains a major source of greenhouse emissions and energy consumption, requiring much greater efforts. At COP29, financial considerations are critical, but our most valuable resource is time. We must act now. Croatia is pushing for carbon neutrality, expediting solar and wind energy deployment with an environmental vulnerability map, and turning commitments into tangible action. Sustainable development must integrate environmental, social and economic dimensions. We rank 8th among 193 UN countries for sustainable development goals, achieving 3.6 GDP growth and proving that green growth is possible. We are embedding sustainability into our financial frameworks to drive our green and digital transition. At this COP, setting an inclusive climate finance target that addresses developing countries' needs and attracts investments is vital. Over the past year, catastrophic floods in Spain, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as in southern Croatia, have shown the devastating impact of rising temperatures. The Mediterranean, one of the most vulnerable regions, calls for urgent action. We welcome the establishment of a dedicated Mediterranean portfolio in the upcoming European Commission, led by Croatian Commissioner Madame Šuica. This initiative will strengthen EU coordination in the region, particularly in addressing climate change and its impact. We must act now to protect our people, economies and natural habitats. Croatia stands committed to a global vision of a sustainable, resilient future. Together, we must transform our ambitions into reality for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And it is my pleasure now to welcome His Excellency Mr. Petr Fiala, Prime Minister of Czechia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the President and people of Azerbaijan for hosting this important conference. Climate change is a serious danger for all of us. We see its devastating impact everywhere in the world. There are floods in Europe, hurricanes in America, landslides in Asia, and drought in Africa. It can increase some of our biggest challenges like health, poverty, and hunger. We all know the risks, but we also know how difficult it is to move from words to action. I am proud that my country, Czech Republic, has made some good progress. Since 1990, our carbon dioxide emissions are down by more than a third. Our energy sector changes to the core. We will discontinue coal, and we push for renewables and nuclear power. As I said in Dubai last year, I strongly believe that nuclear power is essential to meet climate goals. It gives me hope that nuclear energy is more and more popular around the world. We also see development in new technologies. Czech Republic has 50 years of experience with nuclear power. We are ready to assist any country that wants to use it in the future. This includes SMRs or traditional technology. Nuclear power has many benefits. It produces extremely clean energy. It is also very safe with the help of skilled experts and strong international standards. Yes, international cooperation, global action, and innovative solutions are key to solve this crisis. But only reduction of effects is not enough. We also need to focus on adaptation. We must reconsider our priorities in many ways. We must help each other to change our countryside and infrastructure to manage weather extremes. In everything we do, our cooperation must be practical. When I look at the history of global goals, I see many fails. In many areas and regions, it is extremely difficult to fulfill the promises made. It is not likely that we will have more success with even stronger targets. We need to agree on reliable consensus. It must be ambitious and realistic. This is more important than bombastic declarations which are then impossible to deliver. It is good that the European Union wants to lead the way, but others must follow to make a real difference. That is why I really appreciate the commitment of major economic powers of the world. I am glad that they set good examples. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of this conference is noble and necessary. We face hardships, but we must not give up. My country, the Czech Republic, is ready to do its part in cooperation with the international community to build and keep peace, to prevent suffering, and to increase chances for good life for all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mostafa Kamal Madbouli, Prime Minister of Egypt. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
أصحاب الفخامة والسعادة قادة الدول والحكومات.
Your Excellencies, Majesties, heads of state and government, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, may I begin by conveying to you greetings from His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the President of Egypt, who entrusted me with representing him here, giving me the honor of representing Egypt at this COP. And I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to greet His Excellency President Ilham Aliyev, the President of Azerbaijan, and I would like to wish our proceedings every success. And I'm confident we will achieve positive and constructive results at the end of this conference. The holding of this conference is marked by grave events which are deeply troubling, and major challenges which have led to loss of life and which pose huge difficulties. And Egypt calls for concentration on implementation in dealing with the climate crisis and catching up the delays in dispensing finance for loss and damage, especially countries that are deprived of technology and knowledge and who need capacity development in order to avoid loss of human life. Egypt has unstintingly called for strengthening the principle of solidarity and consensus and negotiation that take into account the differences among countries and disparities, as recalled in the Paris Agreement. Moreover, we have launched the Sharm el-Sheikh platform. This conference is an additional opportunity now to strengthen efforts for implementation pursuant to the Paris Agreement, and it therefore behoves us to guarantee funding for the developing countries, because when it comes to the African continent, we see that some 5% of its GDP is taken up by dealing with climate change. Egypt, ladies and gentlemen, seeks to ensure that there is an overall national process which takes into account environmental aspects, and we've launched a strategic initiative for 2030 and green transformation projects, as well as projects based on strengthening partnerships for producing renewable sources, so that by 2030 it amounts to 48%. Egypt has launched a national platform and project, Noa Yafias it's called, which means we shall implement, based on environmental projects and sustainable transportation in the main Egyptian cities. And the African countries in general are suffering from a dearth of funding and are dealing with real problems in implementation. And they are called upon to take emergency measures which do not take into account disparities in terms of capacity. And we stress the need for us to have a quantitative and qualitative goals, and the main goal must be met first and foremost by the developed countries. And customary loans should be replaced by contingency funding to take into account the real conditions for dealing with climate change in the countries. There's also a need to tackle the shortage of funding when it comes to implementation. And we wish the Azerbaijani presidency every success, and we are confident we will meet our expected aspirations. Thank you.
Your Excellency. And it is my pleasure now to welcome His Excellency Mr. Kyriakos Mitsotakis, Prime Minister of Greece. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we meet again at a pivotal moment. The climate is changing, and we are reminded of this fact almost weekly when another tragedy hits some part of the globe. And this reality gives our deliberations a new sense of urgency. Greece is a pioneer when it comes to the energy transition. Our emissions are down 45% versus 2005. Lignite used to provide much more than 50% of our power generation. Its share today is just 6%. We now rely on wind and solar for almost half of our electricity. We're insulating our houses and building a carbon capture value chain for our industry. And Greece is all in on the energy transition. Yet, to move forward, we must put this transition on a firmer ground. This is the challenge that I see. How can we deliver a transition that our citizens can accept and our companies can afford? How can we avoid a political backlash against this ambitious project? And we see this problem in Europe. Europe is a leader in renewable energy, but we still have higher energy prices than anyone else. We are the only region to impose a heavy tax on emissions. We are almost alone in defending the rules of free trade. Yet Europe accounts for a diminishing share of global emissions, only 6% in 2023. We cannot drive ourselves into industrial oblivion. Net zero must be part of a broader European strategy and not the other way around. We need a smart Green Deal, and I see 4 urgent recalibrations to get us there. First, Europe and the world must be more honest about the trade-offs involved in the energy transition. Yes, the energy transition will, in the long run, lower costs, but this transition will not be painless. We need to ask hard questions about a path that goes very fast at the expense of our competitiveness and a path that goes somewhat slower but allows our industry to adapt and to thrive. It is our responsibility to weigh these trade-offs carefully, not to whisk them away. Second, Europe needs a regulatory reset. We spend way too much on targets that in truth get limited scrutiny and enjoy limited legitimacy. We learned this lesson when we tried to bring the transition to our farmers. We cannot micromanage this transition. Each country must choose its own ambitious path. We must aggressively go after the easier emissions first and allow new technologies to mature. We must be ruthlessly technologically neutral. We must let innovation do its work. Third, Europe must rededicate itself to the internal energy market. Rhetorically, everybody supports the internal market. But in practice, Europe often stitches together 27 discrete strategies. We have sometimes a zero-sum mentality within Europe, rather than think about the European and the global interest in a world that is rapidly changing. And the easiest way to strengthen the internal energy market and to bring about the green transition and to lower electricity prices is to invest in our grids. The Draghi report was very clear on this. Grids are a European public good. There is no internal market without a massive expansion in our ability to transport electricity in Europe. And finally, Finally, we need to do more on adaptation. Across Europe and across the world, our citizens are faced with unprecedented climate shocks. We need more resources to prepare, to respond in time in order to save lives and livelihoods, and to help people and communities rebuild after disaster. We cannot focus so much on 2050 that we forget 2024. I am committed as ever to the EU Green Deal. Europe must and will remain a global leader in the transition, but we must be smart and pragmatic, focused on data and science with increased flexibility and with a renewed sense of the things that Europe united can accomplish. We cannot waver in our determination to address climate change, but we must do more to ensure that we can and must continue this journey uninterrupted and without leaving anyone behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Well, dear colleagues, this summit, for which I thank Azerbaijani's presidency, is called upon to contribute further momentum to the effort to limit the global temperature increase to within 1.5 degrees. In Dubai, we set ambitious goals, tripling the world's capacity to generate renewable energy and doubling the global rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. Reaching this goal requires everyone's cooperation, starting with the major emitters of greenhouse gases and adequate financial support. During this conference, we will work to adopt the new climate finance target. Reaching a valuable compromise requires sharing responsibilities and overcoming divisions between developed nations and emerging and developing economies. Italy intends to continue to do its own part. We are already allocating a large amount of the more than €4 billion budget of our climate fund to Africa, and we will continue to support initiatives such as the Green Climate Fund and the Loss and Damage Fund, as well as continue to promote the involvement of multilateral development banks. But it is equally a priority that decarbonization takes into consideration our production and social systems sustainability. We must protect nature with man at its core. An approach that is too ideological and not pragmatic on this matter risks taking us off the road to success. Technology neutrality is the right approach, as currently there is no single alternative to fossil fuel supply. We must have a realistic global outlook. The world population will reach 8.5 billion by 2030, and global GDP will double in the next decade. This will boost energy consumption, also considering the increasing demand for artificial intelligence development. We need a balanced energy mix to enhance the transition process. We must use all available technologies, not only renewables, but also gas, biofuels, hydrogen, CO2 capture, and in future nuclear fusion, which could produce clean, safe, and limitless energy. Italy is at the forefront on nuclear fusion. In the framework of our G7 presidency, we organized the first meeting of the World Fusion Energy Group, sponsored by the International Atomic Energy Agency. We intend to relaunch this technology, which could be a game changer, as it can turn energy from a geopolitical weapon into a widely accessible resource. And then let's work for a new energy diplomacy to multiply opportunities for cooperation between the global north and the global south. Our destinies are interconnected, And from energy connections, we can draw great opportunities. This is the reason why the Climate Energy Nexus is one of the pillars of our Mattei Plan for Africa, the peer-to-peer cooperation strategy that Italy is pursuing, and that I am very pleased to see Azerbaijan, as president of the COP29 has valued as part of the Climate for Peace initiative. Under the Italian presidency, the G7 has promoted new and concrete initiatives, such as Energy for Growth in Africa, to develop infrastructure for green energy production and distribution, and the Adaptation Accelerator Hub to support the world's most vulnerable nations in their climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. So, dear colleagues, like any COP, it is up to us to determine whether this will be a success or a failure. We know that we may not personally benefit from the results of the efforts that we are making, but this is not the important thing. I'm a mother, and as a mother, nothing gives me more satisfaction than when I work for policies that will enable my daughter and her generation to live in a better place. So, as William James would say, act as if what you do makes a difference, for it makes it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Dalton Emani Makamau Tajalagi, Prime Minister of Niue.
Honorable Chair, Excellencies, distinguished guests and delegates, salam. I bring you all Pacific greetings from my government and the people of Niue. COP29 President, the government and the people of Azerbaijan, I thank you for the warm welcome and a great hospitality. Mr. President, as we gather to confront climate change together, we must ask, are we truly standing united with unwavering commitment to address and shared crisis impacting islands, territories, and continents alike? The goal of staying below 1.5 degrees is slipping away from our grasp. For Niue and the Pacific region, climate change is our greatest threat. Despite the challenges of COVID-19 recovery, we continue to face mounting impacts and threaten our survival and resilience. We must work together to preserve our planet for future generations. Niue Do, one of the world's smallest emitters, bears some of the harshest consequences. IPCC 2023 synthesis report, it says while it is stark, it thus offers hope, only if we act with urgency. The report projects that 127 billion will be needed annually by 2030 for adaptation in developing nations. However, adaptation financing remains below half of this need, currently under $50 billion. Developed nations must finalize the new collective quantified goal for climate change, dedicating at least 50% to adaptation and to fully support and fund the Loss and Damage Fund established at COP27 as a matter of justice for the communities already enduring the worst impacts of climate change, and request urgent, simplified and additional funding for small island development states. We call on multilateral climate funds to streamline access processes, making them efficient and accessible for the most vulnerable countries, for the Pacific and others at risk regions. Accessible finance is not optional. It is essential to ensure timely and reliable support for our people and ecosystems. Effective climate funding requires strengthened capacities within our nations. If the 100 billion annually climate finance target is realized, with 5% allocated to the Pacific, we will need the capacity to effectively manage and implement this support. Pacific Islands countries face an increasingly urgent need for adaptation finance as climate impacts deepen. Although new emissions are negligible, we remain committed to our national determined contributions and national adaptation plans. To achieve this, access to the right technologies and resources is essential, as is the financing to implement them. Capacity building will empower us not only to meet climate goals, but to access finance effectively. Let us unite. Let us unite in solidarity at this COP and beyond to foster collective actions towards true climate resilience. I thank you. Saiko, God bless.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Philip Edward Davis, Prime Minister of the Bahamas. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. May I begin by expressing my thanks to the President and people of Azerbaijan for the warm welcome and gracious hospitality bestowed on us. We wish you peace and prosperity. Your Excellencies, this past year has been the hottest in recorded history. For the first time, for more than 12 months, global temperatures have exceeded the warming threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are dangerously close to a line beyond which there is no return, a line that separates the world as we know it from a world that will be unrecognizable. Our choice today will either be remembered as the moment we step forward together or as the instant we allowed the world to slip from our grasp. How will they judge us? Will they say we were too timid, too divided to say what we had the power to protect? Already the catastrophic climate events witnessed around the world have led to major loss of life, property, infrastructure. And yet, we persist in responding to these events as though they are merely unfortunate, isolated, and national. I ask you to look beyond borders, beyond flags. The fires that devour your forests, the hurricanes that shatter our homes are not distant misfortunes, but shared tragedies. What we endure, you endure. What we lose, you lose. And if we fail to act, it will be our children and grandchildren who bear the burden, their dreams reduced to memories of what could have been because of what we have saved. This is the fundamental principle underpinning this United Nations framework. None of us can achieve a solution by acting on our own, and none of us can escape the obligation to act in the best interest of ourselves and each other. Our survival is in our hands, and hope lies not in waiting, but in moving forward with the fierce determination to secure a future that humanity deserves. In order to protect that shared interest, now and into the future, urgent, serious action is needed to reduce carbon emissions. We know this. We know this. A continuation of current practices will lead to catastrophic rise in temperature of up to 3.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The current nationally determined commitments made for 2030 are not being met. Even if they were, we would still face a rise in temperature of 2.6 degrees Celsius or more. It is still technically possible to meet the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius, but only if there is a G20-led massive global mobilization to cut all greenhouse gas emissions, as they are responsible for 80% of all carbon emissions. It is possible, but they would need to act dramatically and decisively, and action would need to start today. In the face of all of this, we still refuse to give up, refuse to lose hope. We cannot accept that our survival is merely an option. And so, in the Bahamas, we continue to play our part. We continue to preserve and protect the forests of grasses in our seas, which are estimated to absorb more carbon than the Amazon rainforest. If the Amazon provides the lungs to the planet, our seagrasses are its hidden blue heart. We will continue our transition to sources of renewable energy, and we will continue to pioneer the use of blue carbon credits to support the architecture of international climate finance. We want to play our part, but alone we cannot succeed in any of it. We simply do not have the resources, and each hurricane, each climate disaster leaves us with even less. Your Excellencies, we must not forget this historic achievement of the Paris Agreement. In Article 9, the special circumstances of small island developing states and least developed countries were addressed in its climate finance provisions. The numbers paint a clear picture. Small island states have spent 18 times more in debt repayments than they have received in climate finance. Our special circumstances require more action, not less. These provisions must urgently now be fully operationalized, along with the other funding commitments previously made. Merely describing the circumstances is not enough. And even as we now approach the 11th hour of an agreement, we are deeply concerned that some of the parties now systematically seek to erase this fundamental provision of the Paris Agreement. The greatest challenge we face isn't just political will, it's political change. We are witnessing governments come to power that are retreating from climate commitments, dismissing the Paris Agreement, and turning inward. This isn't a crisis we can afford to address sporadically, nor is it a battle that can be won in isolated chapters, written and erased with every election. If we leave climate action to the whims of political cycles, our planet's future becomes precarious, very precarious. The climate crisis does not pause for elections or to accommodate the sway of changing political ideas or tides. It demands continuity, commitment, and most of all, solidarity. Excellencies, the world has found the ability to finance wars, the ability to mobilize against pandemics. Yet when it comes to addressing the most profound crisis of our time, the very survival of nations, where is that same ability? It is time to turn ambition into action, promises into plans, and plans into survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Filetti Pinatala Tio, Prime Minister of Tuvalu. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President of COP29, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with all protocols duly observed, let me first of all add my voice to the chorus of expression of gratitude and appreciation to our host, the government and people of Azerbaijan, for the sincerity and largesse of their hospitality. President, I am delighted and indeed honored to speak at this Leaders Summit for the first time as the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, a leader of a country that is not only one of the most vulnerable countries to the impact of climate change, but of a country that is also forecasted for more than 50% of its land territory to be regularly flooded by regular tidal surges in a matter of a mere 26 years' time, by 2050. So, President, I am acutely conscious and aware of the greenhouse emission trajectory we are on. We must therefore accelerate climate action. This COP must be the COP that put us back on track to a 1.5 degree Celsius trajectory. And there is no time to waste. We must learn and respond appropriately to the lessons from the global stocktake. A clear direction from this COP is necessary, if not imperative, to urgently accelerate the deployment of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. As the Finance COP, we must conclude the new collective quantified goal on finance to ensure that it delivers the necessary finance to support developing countries meet ambitious mitigation and adaptation goals. It must also deliver the necessary loss and damage and recognize the special circumstances of LDCs and SITs. On the issue of loss and damage, this COP29 must deliver a clear process to ensure the necessary finance will be delivered to the loss and damage fund. We call for a consultation process that will explore innovative sources of finance for the loss and damage fund. This COP must also deliver a clear set of decisions on Article 6 relating to carbon markets. We need decisions that provide us with the necessary transparency and regular reporting that will instill confidence and assurance that the system is working. President, we would also like to see clear progress on gender issues. Likewise, Tuvalu upholds the noble UN principle of not leaving anyone behind. And in that vein, Tuvalu supports the inclusion of the Republic of China, Taiwan in the COP and related processes and in the UN and its specialized agency. Tuvalu sincerely hope that this COP's concluding decisions will deliver a clear signal that the world is promptly phasing out fossil fuel. Because for Tuvalu and similarly placed country, there is simply no time to waste. I thank you, President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Gaston Alfonso Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, climate change is the single greatest existential threat of our time. Global temperatures are racing past the 1.5 degree threshold, with each year setting new heat records. For nations like Antigua and Barbuda, these are no longer warnings, they are devastating daily realities. Every year of inaction compounds our vulnerability and deepens the injustice that we endure. We cannot wait any longer for empty pledges to become meaningful action. For decades, wealthy nations pledged $100 billion annually to support vulnerable countries, yet these promises have largely gone unfulfilled. Now, as we discuss a new collective quantified goal, we again see proposals that complicate rather than commit. Wealthy polluting countries are seeking to shift responsibility onto elusive private capital instead of ensuring decisive government action to reduce and disincentivize emissions by introducing a global carbon tax to fund the clean energy revolution that is quintessential to saving our planet. To those who bear the greatest responsibility for climate change, I say this: the time for moral responsibility is now. The time for increased climate ambitions is now. If promises of support remain unfulfilled, then justice must demand that those promises are enforced. Today, we see consensus on a clear, substantial climate finance target at COP29 with adequate funding to help us adapt and to build resilience. We're calling not for loans that deepen our debt burden, but for direct investments in the form of compensatory grants to build back more resilient infrastructure that were damaged repeatedly by catastrophic climate events. This financing must be equitable, accessible, and debt-free if we are to achieve climate justice. We cannot continue to hear the same promises as our islands suffer and descend into despair. In the absence of real action from those most responsible for climate change, vulnerable nations are turning to international law. That is why, with a favorable opinion from ITLAS, affirming the duty of states to protect the marine environment, we will appear before the ICJ in December in solidarity with Vanuatu as champions of their case. If voluntary pledges remain broken, then international law will be our pathway to justice.
This is no longer a choice. It is a necessity when commitments go unmet. My small island bears a disproportionate burden in this crisis. Nonetheless, we're determined to utilize our limited resources to build resilience to climate extremities, for we are resolved to secure our nation and our future. This is why small island developing states adopted the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, the ABAS, at the 4th SIDS Conference in Antigua earlier this year. We know that while the bell tolling warns us first, that its sound echoes for all. If vulnerable nations are abandoned today, tomorrow's toll will be universal. This COP29 must be a turning point where the world chooses justice over delay, responsible leadership over evasion, and decisive action over empty promises. Mr. President, we urge that this be the year that promises are honored, because time is running out. Time is running out not just for small states, but time is running out for all of us. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Muhammad Yunus, Chief Advisor of the Interim Government of Bangladesh. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I seek your permission to present the climate catastrophe in a different perspective. This perspective will take us from fixing climate destruction to stopping the further carnage. It's a big task and raises big questions. I seek your indulgence to share with you my long-standing dream of creating a world of 3 zeros. Our civilization is at a grave risk as we continue to promote self-destructive values. We need to mobilize our intellectual, financial, and youth power to lay the foundation of a new civilization, a self-preserving and self-reinforcing civilization. We, the human inhabitants of this planet, are the cause of the destruction of the planet. We are doing it deliberately. We have chosen a lifestyle which works against the environment. We justify this with an economic framework which is considered as natural as the planetary system. That economic framework thrives on limitless consumption. In order to survive, we need to create another civilization, another culture, a counterculture which is based on a different lifestyle. It will be based on zero waste. It will limit consumption to essential needs, leaving no residual waste. This lifestyle will also be based on zero carbon, no fossil fuel, only renewables. This will be an economy based primarily on zero personal profit, or that is on social businesses. This business, social business, is defined as a non-dividend business addressed to solve social and environmental problems. It will facilitate entrepreneurship for the youth. Young people will get prepared through new education of entrepreneurship. Education of creating job seekers will be replaced by entrepreneurship-focused education. Safety of environment needs a new lifestyle. That lifestyle would not be imposed. It will be a choice. Young people will love that lifestyle as a matter of choice. Each young person will grow up as a 3-0 person. Zero net carbon emissions, zero wealth concentration, through building social businesses only, and zero unemployment by turning themselves into entrepreneurs. Each person will grow up as a 3-0 person and will remain a 3-0 person all his or her life. That will create the new civilization. It can be done. All we need to do is to accept a new lifestyle consistent with the safety of the planet and all who live on it. Today's generation of youth will do the rest. They love their planet. I hope you'll join me in this dream. If we all dream together, it will happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Irakli Kobakidze, Prime Minister of Georgia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Dear Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to address you on behalf of Georgia. At the outset, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to His Excellency, Mr. Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Mukhtar Babayev, COP29 President-designate, as well as the government of the Republic of Azerbaijan for their generous hospitality and for making this conference in Baku an outstanding success. This event marks a significant milestone, as it is the first time that a country from the South Caucasus region is hosting the conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. I would like to wish Azerbaijan every success in guiding us towards a fruitful and ambitious outcome at COP29, fostering a collaborative spirit and constructive dialogue throughout the negotiations. This conference comes at a critical juncture as climate change emerges as one of the most pressing challenges of our era, demanding the urgent global action and cooperation to confront its far-reaching consequences. Regrettably, along this journey, armed conflicts not only lead to profound humanitarian crisis, but also disrupt and slow the world's effort to combat climate change. Escalating impacts of climate change, including the rapid melting of glaciers and rising sea levels, are profoundly disrupting economies of the developing countries and jeopardizing the livelihoods of particularly vulnerable nations and communities. Regrettably, Georgia is no exception in facing harsh repercussions of climate change. In the recent years, acknowledgement of the links between human rights and the environment has greatly increased. During Georgia's presidency of the Council of Europe in 2019-2020, one of the 4 priorities was human rights and environmental protection. In the final declaration by the presidency of the Committee of Ministers, the Council of Europe's role as the guarantor of our common pan-European legal framework was underscored, emphasizing its responsibility in integrating environmental dimensions into human rights initiatives and promoting a rights-based approach to environment protection. This declaration laid the foundation for significant advancements in environmental protection within the Council of Europe. The Constitution of Georgia singles out the right to the environment as a basic right, while in the constitutions of a number of leading countries, the right of life is used when discussing the right to the environment. So does the European Court of Human Rights. In response to these urgent challenges, it's crucial that we remain steadfast in our commitment to halve global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Achieving this goal is critical if we are to limit global warming to the 1.5 degrees Celsius target set by the Paris Agreement. The government of Georgia is dedicated to fulfilling its national commitments by taking concrete actions to implement the Paris Agreement. To this end, Georgia is committed to submitting its third-generation nationally determined contributions by 2025, consistent with the aim of limiting global warming to within the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit and advancing the vision of Europe as the first continent to achieve net zero emissions. In preparing the new NDC, the government of Georgia is actively engaging key stakeholders by embracing an inclusive, whole-of-society approach. Regrettably, due to the ongoing illegal occupation of Georgia's Abkhazia and Sakhalin Valley regions, the government is prevented from the possibility to implement similar measures in the mentioned regions, which consists of the 20% of Georgia's territories, with the aim to reduce harmful impacts of climate change and mitigate its implications. The outcome of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance will determine whether COP29 is viewed as a success. The NCQG must see a significant increase from the current $100 billion USD target and stimulate the alignment of global financial flows with the goals of the Paris Agreement. In this context, it's worth recalling that at COP28, it was acknowledged that developing countries would need close to $6 trillion USD by the end of this decade to efficiently address climate change. COP29 must also improve access to climate finance for developing countries and build capacity so that these countries can effectively utilize increased climate finance. In Georgia, we take our responsibility to address the climate crisis and have already undertaken significant steps to make a meaningful impact. Georgia is committed to ongoing efforts to mainstream climate action in the national budget through annual assessments, enabling us to measure the impact of climate change on our expenditures and economic development. This work identifies mitigation and adaptation costs and promotes partner collaboration, laying foundations for coordinating climate finance to enhance resilience and achieve NDC targets. Effective climate policy development alongside transformative programs and the decoupling of economic growth in developing countries depends heavily on the successful alignment of global financial flows with the Paris Agreement's objectives. Substantial financial support, technical assistance, and technology transfer to developing nations are all crucial for effective implementation of their ambitious climate targets. In conclusion, let me stress that Georgia is honored to participate in the COP taking place in our region. Let us begin the journey of turning our collective aspirations into meaningful results and a fight against climate change. We will work to support our neighbors and friends from Azerbaijan to achieve a successful outcome of COP29. Together, we are transforming South Caucasus region into the region of opportunities and success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Siausi Ofa Kivahafulo Zovalani, Prime Minister of Tonga. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Maloelele, and I bring greetings from the Kingdom of Tonga. Mr. President, I congratulate you for assuming the presidency of COP29. My delegation assures you of our unwavering support as you lead us during this vital global climate summit. Climate change has been, is, and will be the most existential threat to Pacific Island nations, including Tonga. The recent findings from the IPCC and National Climate Assessments once more underscore this fact. Tonga witnesses a concerning increase in the intensity of tropical cyclones over the past decade. We lived through Category 5 systems in 2014, 2018, and 2020. Our sea level rise has risen at an alarming rate of 7.3 millimeters per year. And this surpasses by far the global average. In turn, this has led to severe coastal erosion, frequent flooding, and the loss of crucial infrastructure. The incursion of salt water into lands has damaged groundwater quality. Rising ocean temperatures have caused widespread coral bleaching and a decline in marine biodiversity. The latest NDC synthesis report and UNEP emission cap report paint a sobering picture. We are not on track to meet the Paris climate goal and keep the 1.5 degree temperature limit within reach. We must accelerate the phase-down of unabated coal use and phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Tonga has a negligible contribution to global greenhouse gas emission, but we are steadfast in our commitment to implementing the necessary climate actions and targets. As the current chair of the Pacific Island Forum, Tonga strongly reiterates the critical importance of commensurate and timely access to climate finance for small island developing states. We reiterate our call on developed countries to fulfill their long-standing commitment to mobilize $100 billion annually. We welcome the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund at COP27 and emphasize the urgent need to operationalize this fund. We call upon the Green Climate Fund to recognize the robust procedures of multinational organizations such as World Bank and encourage innovative approaches and partnerships such as the Save the Children initiative, in which Tonga is a pilot country. Tonga supports the Unlocking the Blue Pacific Prosperity endorsed by Pacific leaders aim to build effective ocean management, robust food system, and sustainable finance. In addition, our Pacific leaders recognize that we need timely, predictable, and scale-up access to climate finance and establish the Pacific Resilient Facility. This is Pacific-led, member-owned, and managed climate and disaster resilient financing facility. We urge global partners to continue their support for these two crucial regional facilities. At a national level, Tonga established the Tonga Climate Fund to accelerate the implementation of our climate action and achieve our vision to be a resilient Tonga by 2035. We further echo the call of Pacific leaders for states and regions to support the 2021 Landmark Declaration on preserving maritime zones, reaffirming our commitment to safeguarding our maritime zones from the adverse impact of sea level rise. Mr. President, Tonga fully supports the bid from Australia to host COP31, as it will be known as the Pacific COP. In closing, I express our deep hope that COP29 will foster genuine partnership and cooperation among all parties, and we must honor our respective responsibilities, especially now, as time is not on our side. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Edi Rama, Prime Minister of Albania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Well, I decided to leave aside my well-prepared speech because in the meantime, since yesterday, I was watching the silent TV screens in the Leaders' Lounge, where the organizers have thoughtfully added green plants above the comfortable couches. People there eat, drink, meet, and take photos together, while images of voiceless speeches from leaders play on and on and on in the background. To me, this seems exactly like what happens in the real world every day. Life goes on with its old habits, and our speeches full of good words about fighting climate change change nothing. Worse, as the UN Secretary General emphasized yesterday, carbon emissions actually increased last year from previous COP to this COP instead of decreasing. And ambitious goals are once again postponed in a world increasingly confused and deeply divided. I come here from a little country in the middle of Europe, Albania, where we are proud to have 100% renewable energy production. But what does it mean for the future of the world if the biggest polluters continue business as usual? Far be it from me to lecture anyone. After all, we are used to being lectured, not to lecturing others. But my point is, what on earth are we doing in this gathering over and over and over. If there is no common political will on the horizon to go beyond words and unite for meaningful action. And adding insult to the injury, some major and minor players even boycotted this annual global event. What does this mean? For a long time, we Albanians lived under the curse of a brutal history that left us in complete isolation. No individual rights, no freedom of movement, no hope for the future. Recently, we have been blessed with the company of the European Union, and for the first time in our history, freedom, individual rights, hopes and dreams have become part of our lives. But what is happening in Europe and around the world today doesn't leave much room for optimism. Though optimism is the only way of survival we Albanians know. And while my voiceless image plays on the silent TV screens of the beautiful lounge next to this room, I want to end by evoking here a story from Anas bin Malik. May Allah be pleased with him, and I'm a Catholic by the way, who narrated that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, if the day of judgment comes while one of you has a sapling in his hands, if he is able to plant it before it comes, let him plant it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Patrice Emery Trovoada, Prime Minister of Sao Tome and Principe. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me first to express our gratitude to the Azerbaijani government for the perfect organization of this event at the utmost importance, which brings together world's leaders, civil society, governmental and multilateral organizations to reinforce the commitment to increase our ambition in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, to address climate finance, and how to turn key climate decisions into concrete action and solid plans. Being member of the Small Island Developing States, I would like to commend the Republic of Azerbaijan for its solidarity on the initiative to support islands. Excellencies, São Tomé and Príncipe, an island country located in the Gulf of Guinea, stands out for its natural beauty and unique terrestrial and marine biodiversity, harboring species found nowhere else in the world. As a small island developing state, our country faces specificities and vulnerabilities that make it particularly sensitive to climate change. Although São Tomé and Príncipe have a low rate of greenhouse gas emission, our populations every single day suffers the consequences of the climate change. These effects put food security, water resources, and livelihoods at risk, as well as compromising any development and resilience initiatives. Despite these challenges, we have made continuous efforts to adapt and to mitigate climate change, mobilizing climate finance for sustainable development and the protection of our ecosystem. Notable initiatives include the conservation of mangrove, the creation of marine protected areas, and protecting natural park on the island of São Tomé, as well on the island of Príncipe, which has already been recognized as a World Biosphere Reserve. In line with the Paris Agreement, we are committed to reduce emissions by 27% by 2030. In 2023, starting with Portugal, we signed a memorandum to convert part of our bilateral debt into climate action, guaranteeing the preservation of natural capital, counting today for 5.3% of our total external debt. This kind of initiative could turn São Tomé and Príncipe into a global example for how to reconcile debt relief and economic recovery with environmental protection. Today, at COP29, once again, tirelessly, we call for more funding for renewable energy, carbon capture, and other green technologies for a rapid transition. Once again, we call for enacting stricter regulations and a fair and unified approach to the problem based on climate finance, climate justice, and common sense. We will not give up. We need to increase global public awareness as, independent of geographies, fact and science is unequivocal about the world's conjuncture worsening. We are leaders leading people, and it's our responsibility to ensure that our decision and action brings concrete benefits for them capable of shaping the future of humanity. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Deacon Michel, Prime Minister of Grenada. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, the President of COP29, esteemed colleagues, distinguished leaders, I extend Grenada's appreciation to the COP presidency for its commitment to leading us through this pivotal moment in our shared climate journey. Grenada, and by extension CARICOM, stand ready to work in partnership with you toward a successful and truly impactful COP29. What do you say in 2 minutes, 30 seconds that makes a difference? I lead a country that this year experienced, for the first half of the year, a 15-year drought. And then on the first day of the second half of the year, experienced the earliest Category 5 hurricane that devastated our islands of Carriacou and Petite Martinique. And at this very moment, as I stand here, yet again, my island is being devastated by flash flooding, landslides, and deluge of excessive rainfall, all in the space of a matter of a couple hours. That is the reality lived by small island developing states. And so it takes a lot of courage to come to this event. In fact, it's my first, it may be my last. The reality is, we're not here to beg. We're not here to ask for sympathy. We are here to say that it's one planet. It may be small island developing states today. It will be Spain tomorrow. It will be Florida the day after. It's one planet. It's one Earth. And the partnership that we are asking for, the partnership to finance climate adaptation, the partnership to finance climate resilience, is a partnership that works in the best interests of the planet and of all of mankind. So whether it's innovative financing tools like our catastrophic parametric risk insurance, or whether it's not using a big word like operationalize the loss and damage fund, but actually put the money in the fund and make it available for those of us who suffer the loss and damage, it's a partnership for mutual benefit. Because the lessons we learn in small island developing states of resilience, of adaptability, of sustainability is a lesson that we can share with the world. And that's all we're asking for, partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Mian Mohammed Shehbaz Sharif, Prime Minister of Pakistan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida yuslih lakum a'malakum wa yaghfir lakum dhunubakum wa man yuti' Allah wa rasulahu faqad faza fawzan azima. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to congratulate my very dear brother, President Ilham Aliyev, for organizing a wonderful event to understand the calamities which unfortunately some of the countries have already faced, and some will if we do not act to counter those measures which are so important at this point in time to have conducive environment so that a country like Pakistan, which faced one of the most devastating floods out of climate change back in 2022, which left millions of people homeless. They were spending days and nights under open skies. Millions of acres of land in Pakistan submerged, and standing crops were completely destroyed. Millions of houses were absolutely submerged, and almost 1,700 people died. And of course, the loss to our economy was about $30 million. That was the cruel intensity of those floods. And this must be kept in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that Pakistan is one of those countries which hardly contribute 0.5% of emissions, global emissions. And yet we are vulnerable and in the list of those 10 countries which can, God forbid, face this kind of devastation again. My memories are still fresh. I was meeting people in Balochistan who were affected by these floods. A boy by the name of Ikramullah had lost everything. His entire village was erased from the face of the earth. His home was completely demolished, and his school was also submerged. And we had arranged his education to another part of Pakistan. And this boy is becoming a very productive hand of Pakistan, but not for all those who had suffered this calamity in Pakistan and other parts of the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is this opportunity that COP29 should understand, make this understanding loud and clear that we will have to fulfill those financial pledges committed in COP27, COP28, and yet I think those huge financial commitments have to be materialized. Ladies and gentlemen, we would also like to raise this point that 10 years ago in Paris, we had failed to stop the rise in emissions and catastrophic global warming. And those pledges in Paris 10 years ago, which were made, have yet to see the light of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, as the -1 emitters, we should not brave the impact of emissions realized by others without even the tools to finance resilience. Without climate justice, there can be no real resilience. And I wouldn't want other countries to face the plight Pakistan faced back in 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan is a resilient, hard-working, and responsible nation, and we are fully committed to being part of the global climate solutions. My government has taken concrete actions to deliver on its commitment of producing 60% of all energy from clean sources and shifting 30% of our vehicles to EVs by the end of this decade. At the same time, Pakistan is going to go through a renewable energy revolution. Last year, Pakistan presented a comprehensive national adaptation plan. And this year, we have developed our national carbon market framework. But we cannot do it alone. Pakistan needs international support to deliver on its climate ambitions. Ladies and gentlemen, the hammer is on. I'd not like to take more time, but let me say, developing countries will need an estimated $6.8 trillion by 2030 to implement less than half their current NDCs. The same goes for adaptation and loss and damage. And in COP27, Pakistan led this phenomenon by our very able team, led by Madam Shari Rahman. We believe that under Azerbaijan's able leadership, COP29 can transform into a finance COP by restoring confidence in the pledging process and scaling up climate finance. I strongly feel that climate finance must be grant-based and not add to the debt burden of vulnerable developing countries. Finally, Excellencies, 2 years ago, I warned, and I warned at the top of my voice, that the future would never forgive our inaction. Today, I echo the same warning with greater urgency and fullest energy at my command. Ladies and gentlemen, we know the causes, we know the solutions. Now, we must find the courage to act and act swiftly. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Daniel Nicolas Risch, Prime Minister of Liechtenstein. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, dear leaders, let me start by thanking the Republic of Azerbaijan for its effort in the run-up to this Leaders' Summit and for hosting COP29 here in Baku. The presence of so many states from around the world is a powerful sign that the fight against climate change is a key challenge of our time. Also, it underscores that only together we can find solutions. And noticing the slight critics on Europe and at least some European states in the introductory remarks of President Aliyev, I'd like to point to the fact that all European countries sent high-level delegations to Baku and that I myself and a large group of prime ministers and presidents from Europe are here in Baku to show full support of COP29. Because one thing is clear, multilateralism must be our answer to the global threats arising from climate change. Our annual gathering is also a sign of enduring courage. Our world is experiencing a multitude of security, economic, political, and social challenges. The number of conflicts and therefore also the number of displaced persons and humanitarian needs is steadily increasing. Climate change in particular has the potential to further aggravate global security risks. It is therefore crucial that we come together again to keep the targets of the Paris Agreement within reach. One thing is clear to me. It will be us who have to explain our children and grandchildren why we have not tried harder. With a quarter of this century almost over, we all feel the increasingly negative consequences of human-made global warming. The time is now for bold steps to keep these negative effects at bay. It is the challenge of our generation to shape the current political and economical system for a more sustainable future for all. Last year, we came together in Dubai and agreed on the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era, a crucial step to realize the steep and fast reductions in carbon emissions necessary. Liechtenstein has strongly supported this bold decision and encouraged all states to strive for the most ambitious carbon reduction targets possible. COP28 also marked the conclusion of the first global stocktake. The GST and the scientific evidence provided by the IPCC have let bare the gaps with regard to climate action. These gaps need to be addressed at this COP and in the next round of nationally determined contributions due next year. Liechtenstein fully supports the outcomes of this first GST and intends to submit its updated NDC in early 2025, well ahead of next COP in Brazil. Let me be clear at this point. Producing ambition NDCs on paper is important, but in the end, the actual delivery and implementation of these targets will be what counts. It is not about leading by promise, but about leading by example. In this spirit, Liechtenstein has always taken its commitment serious. Despite being one of the most industrialized countries in the world, our carbon emissions have declined by 30% compared to 1990. While GDP is 5 times higher than back then. This was only possible due to strong commitments from our private sector to actively reduce their emissions and the adoption of ambitious policies. Mr. President, I hope that this year's COP will also mark a step change in the way we provide financial means for developing countries in need of support. As we have learned from the current climate financial goals, a quantitative target can lead to frustrations both with developing and developed countries. To counter this, we strongly advocate for a stronger focus on qualitative elements, adding flexibility and the foundation to the further scale-up climate finance. Liechtenstein is already and will continue to provide voluntary climate finance, currently amounting to around $70 per capita. And we encourage all countries in a position to do so to also start providing voluntary climate finance. Looking ahead, our delegation is ready to engage in the upcoming negotiations and will support the presidency in its effort to achieve meaningful and robust decisions. We all may face challenges currently, but we are obliged to do our best to keep the goals of the Paris Agreement within reach, for us and for the generations to come. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Aziz Akhannouch, Prime Minister of Morocco. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, we thank and congratulate Azerbaijan on organizing COP29 and for its unstinting commitment in preparing this momentous event. Under the enlightened leadership of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, may God help him, Morocco has for many years played a major role in the energy transition at the international, national, and continental levels. And here, the Initiative for the Adaptation of African Agriculture, known as AAA, was launched under the auspices of His Majesty at COP22 in Marrakesh with a bold vision: transform African agriculture and protect the environment to tackle climate change. In close collaboration with the African Adaptation Initiative, the AAA initiative continued its action on 3 main tracks: improving soil management, increased access to water for irrigation, and the integration of resilient agricultural technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, in keeping with the enlightened vision of His Majesty the King, renewable energies in Morocco today account for approximately 40% of electric production capacity, a figure which will rise to 52% by 2030. Morocco has also begun updating its nationally determined contribution, NDC, and will be raising its decarbonization ambitions, and by integrating new structuring projects, namely desalination plants using renewable energy and repurposing biomass, as well as green hydrogen. With some of the most competitive solar and wind resources, as well as a proven track record in attracting investors, Morocco intends to play a key role in responding to the major challenges of carbon neutrality. Ladies and gentlemen, Morocco takes full ownership of its responsibilities. However, these challenges concern each and every nation of this planet, especially the most industrialized countries. Natural disasters due to global warming, which are increasingly frequent and intense, are causing considerable economic and human loss and is affecting food security, health care facilities, and access to safe water. The world is awaiting concrete commitments coming out of this COP29 to accelerate ecological transition and to provide, in a spirit of solidarity, the necessary resources for implementing them. And here I would highlight sustainable financing solutions for adaptation funds and climate insurance mechanisms to enable the most vulnerable countries, often the least historically responsible for emissions, to strengthen their resilience. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Russell Miso Dlamini, Prime Minister of Eswatini. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellency President Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Your Excellencies, Mukhtar Babayev, President of the 29th Conference of State Parties to the UNFCCC. I am honored to deliver this statement on behalf of His Majesty King Mswati III, Head of State of the Kingdom of Eswatini. A year ago, in Dubai, multiple leaders stood on this platform, urging immediate action to tackle climate change. Since then, our countries, Eswatini included, have endured severe climate-induced events. In our case, these ranged from destructive hailstorms to droughts that have upended livelihoods, especially in agriculture, a key sector for the people of Eswatini. Excellencies, it is abundantly clear that we are at a critical juncture. The World Meteorological Organization warns of an 80% chance that global temperatures will exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels within the next 5 years, a catastrophic milestone. Meanwhile, the UNEP Adaptation Gap report highlights an adaptation cost gap projected to reach up to $340 billion by 2030. After 30 years, the stark question is, are we failing? We must seize what may be our last opportunity. As Alexander the Great said, upon the conduct of each depends the fate of all. We must strengthen both our commitments and our collaborative efforts to tackle this global crisis. The recent UN Summit of the Future called for unity to safeguard our planet. Cooperation must genuinely address mitigation without placing undue burden on poorer nations or sacrificing nature. Equitable solutions for all people, profits, and our planet are imperative. Meaningful action also demands that no country be left behind. In this regard, we urge the inclusion of the Republic of China and Taiwan in our collective climate response to leverage their contributions. Effective climate finance remains essential, yet accessing these funds is overly complex for developing nations like Eswatini. We face frequent climate-induced disasters, compounded by financial barriers that reverse development gains. Disaster relief and climate finance must be simplified, streamlined, and expanded with a focus on adaptation, mitigation, and just transitions. As we finalize our NDCs, let us not lose sight of the ultimate goal. Together, we must commit to a world where future generations will look back on this moment as the turning point toward a resilient and sustainable climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Mark Stephen Brown, Prime Minister of Cook Island. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
To the Honourable President of the Conference, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Kia ora. I come from the Pacific, a part of the world that contributes 0.03% of carbon emissions to the world. The Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius remains within our reach, but only if you act decisively. And when I say you, I'm talking to the G20 countries who contribute 80% of global carbon emissions. How many countries in the Pacific are doing our part in mitigation with ambitious projects for 100% renewable energy? The science is clear. The world is warming, and the transition away from fossil fuels is non-negotiable. As underscored by last year's global stocktake outcome, this challenge goes beyond economics. It is about safeguarding our communities' resilience, even in the remotest corners. Climate change is not a distant threat. It is a present reality that we face every day in the Pacific. And now we see its impact in the developed countries, with Spain being the latest victim just a couple of weeks ago. We don't need to be enemies to each other. Climate change is and will continue to be the greatest enemy to all of us. We need to work together. Let me talk about climate finance. Climate finance is not just the catalyst for climate action. It is the essential ingredient. Developing countries need sufficient and reliable support to implement the Paris Agreement effectively. For small island developing states, specific finance provisions within the Paris Agreement recognize our unique vulnerabilities. A successful new collective quantified goal must reflect this. We call for minimum allocation floors on the new collective qualified goals for SIDS, directly linked with the provision goal. This floor should be no less than $40 billion in grant equivalent terms per year, a conservative estimate based on our pressing needs. To achieve meaningful progress, SIDS must have access to high levels of concessional finance. This means grant funding for adaptation efforts, not loans. It means grant-based finance for loss and damage response. Do the right thing by our countries. Don't make us jump hoops and then wait. Accelerating the financial support will bring us closer to the scaled-up finance and improved access envisioned by the Paris Agreement. While the Pacific faces the brunt of climate change through sea level rise, the erosion of small islands, flooding, droughts, and extreme weather, inaction will lead to consequences felt globally, growing more severe with time. So let us ask ourselves, what if this was my home, my family? This shared sense of humanity should inspire us to work towards tangible, transformative outcomes over the coming days, ensuring that COP29 concludes with meaningful progress. These appeals have been voiced countless times, including by myself at previous COPs. Yet, here we are again, frustrated by inaction, unheard, and facing resistance to the necessary scale-up of climate finance. For the sake of those most vulnerable, we must set a path forward that aligns with the urgent realities we face. My country is ready, again, to play its part. The question remains, are we ready to act decisively and collaboratively for future generations? I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Musalia Mudavadi, Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign and Diaspora Affairs of Kenya. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished heads of government and heads of state, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I bring salutations from President William Ruto of Kenya, and I make this statement on his behalf. I congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election as the President of COP29 and commend the people and government of Azerbaijan for hosting this historic meeting. Similarly, I congratulate the leadership of the United Arab Emirates for the historic milestones and achievements made at COP28. The COP presidency has called on us to act in solidarity for a green world and to drive actions on finance, energy, agriculture, cities, and human development, climate peace and climate peace nexus. I believe these bold areas hold a great promise in consolidating the gains already made as we escalate the fight against climate change, whose impacts are widespread. In Kenya, the impacts of climate change are an everyday reality. Currently, we are experiencing unusually warmer days, yet only 5 months ago, we experienced horrible floods that led to the deaths of 267 and displaced 281,000 people. The floods also destroyed critical infrastructure, including 1,967 schools, 62 health facilities. Besides, the droughts of last year destroyed livelihoods and killed over 2.4 million livestock. This troubling climate story is not confined to Kenya. Africa as a whole is already grappling with the climate-induced annual losses and damages on infrastructure, agriculture, water, tourism, and other climate-sensitive sectors, ranging from 9 to 12% of the continent's GDP. Consequently, this meeting is a demonstration of solidarity and intention to act together to change the tide and rewrite the climate story. I believe a green and resilient world is still within our reach during our lifetime. This finance COP can make it happen by agreeing to scale up the climate finance based on a new collective quantified goal, quantum for not less than $1.3 trillion annually from 2025. This is key to meet the adaptation and loss damage needs of developing countries. The COP should also agree on quantum of not less than $5.8 trillion for the implementation of NDCs by 2030. Further, we must agree to deliver this vital financing both in quality and urgency, as well as with transparency and ease of access. This is crucial in accelerating implementation of the national adaptation plans. We equally need to agree on a global goal on adaptation as we significantly increase ambition
for the NDCs to limit a global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The COP should agree on the investment measures to triple installed renewable energy capacity by 2030. Enhanced cooperation on carbon markets under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement has a huge untapped potential to unlock the much-needed public and private capital. I am aware the current carbon markets are facing price volatility and misallocation of credits, lack of uniform standards, and climate justice. The COP must therefore address these issues and others in a conclusive manner and operationalize Article 6 through renewable bilateral agreements and centralized multilateral marketplace. The loss and damage facility has progressed commendably from Sharm el-Sheikh 2 years ago to Dubai last year. While I acknowledge the milestones so far realized, I urge this gathering to operationalize the loss and damage fund, as well as to fast-track establishment of a mechanism to handle unique needs of vulnerable developing countries. The response measures are critical in mitigating climate change. However, some measures have negative cross-border impacts on trade, food security, livelihoods, competitiveness, and development. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, global transformation to a low-carbon economy requires an investment of at least $4 to $6 trillion per year to support climate action. However, most developing countries cannot raise this capital due to high interest rates on loans, escalating costs of climate shocks and transition, and depressed fiscal space. We must reform the multilateral development banks to unlock financing at scale and to create incentives such as debt restructuring and sustainability, including the high cost of capital, borrowing, as well as scale and agility of climate finance. Technology and innovation are key to providing appropriate practical solutions and to enhancing efforts by developing countries to eradicate poverty. We must therefore break the hold-ups to technology and innovations to enable the developing world to leapfrog sustainable growth models. Similarly, we must enhance research and early warning systems to bolster predictive capabilities and avert calamities, as well as transform agricultural and food systems to cut emissions, develop resilience, and create job opportunities, especially for women and youth. Mr. President, to conclude, we need to confront the weak political will and unsustainable economic interests that put profits over people and the planet, standing on the transition to a global low-carbon economy to achieve a green world. We need credible commitments and robust international cooperation for transformation, to transform the climate crisis into opportunities. We can do it, and we should do it. I thank you all.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Judith Suminwa Tuluka, Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, heads of state and government, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, President of COP29. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today in Baku at COP29 at a time when our planet is dealing with an unprecedented climate emergency. We can all observe that climate change is accelerating, challenging our projections and our adaptation capacity. The key lies in collective action, which must be bold and underpinned by the principles of justice, equity, and solidarity. My country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the world's largest lung, is known as a solution country with its vast expanses of forests which regulate global climate, its rich biodiversity, its freshwater reserves, its immense wetlands and vast tracts of arable lands, as well as its many critically essential metals for cutting-edge technologies in this area of energy transition, the DRC is at the heart of climate challenges. However, we are extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change and global warming. We must stand with our other partners to achieve our shared commitment, because these are serious times. Each country must play its part. Furthermore, we must be transparent and act in good faith to address the issue of climate financing, which must respond effectively to needs with more ambition, more commitment, but also, and more importantly, more equity. In response to the climate crisis, our government has prepared a national adaptation plan, which needs to benefit from significant financing to respond to our shared objectives. There is an urgent need to ease the requirements for access and to accelerate the operationalization of the funds earmarked for L&D. I believe it is sufficiently clear that the biodiversity in the east of the DRC is in danger, and yet we are forced to divert a part of our budget to deal with this barbaric war instead of investing in climate resilience. Therefore, I call for a collective awareness of this tragic and unique situation. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is committed, along with the rest of the international community, to identifying together strategic projects to be implemented in a lasting win-win partnership that will benefit our local and global communities. As such, the DRC has set up a carbon market regulating authority, and we intend to use this to implement Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. It would be remiss of me if I didn't express my heartfelt thanks to the Republic of Azerbaijan and its president for the very warm hospitality extended to us. I also wish to reiterate my call for all stakeholders to mobilize around the commitments that we have undertaken, that we undertook at the Paris conference in 2015. As such, I would join other African group countries to call for the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal, to be established at, to be set at $1.3 trillion by 2030, based on concrete results and specific needs of developing countries. I am deeply convinced when we all mobilize and are driven by a shared commitment to preserve our planet, this conference can achieve its objectives. Next year in Belém, we must ensure we can announce encouraging progress and make concrete achievements as part of our environmental commitments. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We will now suspend the statements for 15 minutes. Kindly keep your seats. We will resume shortly. Thank you. Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, we will now hear the special messages. And it is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Cho Hong Sik, Special Envoy of His Excellency Mr. Yoon Suk Yeol, President of the Republic of Korea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President of COP29, esteemed leaders, and distinguished representatives, good afternoon. I'm honored to join COP29 as the special envoy of President Yoon Suk Yeol of the Republic of Korea. At last year's COP28 in Dubai, we reaffirmed our commitment to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, aiming to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. We took crucial steps with the UAE consensus, pledging to triple renewable energy capacity and accelerate low-carbon technologies like nuclear power and hydrogen. These are foundational steps toward the world we envision. Here at COP29, we must now establish the mechanisms to translate these commitments into action. A new climate finance goal is essential to reach the 1.5 degree target, and I hope COP29 will adopt a framework that is both ambitious and achievable. Setting strong emission reduction target is also vital. as the impacts of climate change are becoming severe globally. This year alone, Korea experienced an exceptionally long and hot summer, reminding us that the time to act is now. With our vision as a global pivotal state, Korea is dedicated to supporting climate resilience in the global south. Our official development assistance increased by 30% this year, with a particular focus on green ODA for countries most vulnerable to climate change. Additionally, Korea recently pledged an extra $300 million to the Green Climate Fund and $7 million to the Loss and Damage Fund, underscoring our commitment to shared solutions. Domestically, we are also advancing a green transition, targeting a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. This is ambitious for an energy-intensive, manufacturing-based economy, but we are fully committed to meeting this challenge. As part of our strategy, we are preparing our 2035 nationally determined contributions in alignment with the 1.5 degree Celsius goal and the 2050 neutrality target. Our carbon-free energy initiative, developed in partnership with Japan, the Czech Republic, and UAE, and the IEA, supports a diverse mix of carbon-free energy sources, establishing standards for global implementation. Climate change is a shared and urgent challenge. We are already seeing the cost of delayed action. If we fail to act decisively now, the climate may reach irreversible tipping point. I hope COP29 will give us inspiration to take bold steps toward achieving the 1.5 degrees Celsius target for the benefit of present and future generations. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. John Podesta, Senior Advisor to the President of International Climate Policy, speaking on behalf of the President of the United States of America. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Colleagues, on behalf of President Biden, the United States is here at COP29 to help produce successful outcomes that keep 1.5 degrees C alive. We face an urgent question. Do we secure sustainable prosperity for our countries, or do we condemn our most vulnerable to unimaginable climate disasters? 2024 will be the hottest year on record. The consequences of a rapidly warming planet are all around us, from the hundreds of people killed by Hurricanes Helene and Milton in the United States to the millions of children at risk of starvation in southern Africa from the worst drought in decades, to the torrential rain that stranded students in schools and displaced nearly 100,000 people in Colombia. Vulnerable communities do not just need ambition, they need action. That's why President Biden and Vice President Harris have marshaled unprecedented climate resources over the past 4 years. Because of historic private sector investments made possible by the Inflation Reduction Act, the United States economy will continue down the path of decarbonization, reducing emissions for years to come. And we are on track to meet President Biden's ambitious international public finance commitment of $11 billion per year by the end of 2024. To accelerate our progress here at COP29, we need to first conclude key negotiated outcomes. This includes building on last year's global stocktake concluding work on Article 6, and adopting a robust NCQG that addresses climate insecurity while building strong, sustainable economies. It should be multi-layered with an ambitious, realistically achievable support layer involving new contributors, underpinned by a set of qualitative elements that evolve the international financial architecture, enhance access to finance for developing countries, and improve debt sustainability. Second, countries, particularly major economies, need to keep their Dubai commitment and submit 2035 NDCs that are economy-wide, 1.5 aligned, and include all greenhouse gases. Third, we encourage countries to submit their first biennial transparency reports by December 31st. The United States will meet that commitment. And fourth, promote the action agenda in key initiatives outside the Paris Agreement. Colleagues, we have a clear choice between a safer, cleaner, fairer future and a dirtier, more dangerous, and more expensive one. We know what to do. Let's get to work. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. As I've indicated, we will shortly resume the first part of the high-level segment for statements. Please remain in your seats. Dear distinguished delegates, let us now resume the first part of the high-level segment. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mikhail Mushtin, Prime Minister of the Russian Federation. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Distinguished Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I greet all the participants in the conference. Under the leadership of President Putin, Russia is taking active part in measures taken by the international community to combat global climate change in order to guarantee the well-being of future generations. We've managed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions virtually twofold compared to 1990. By 2050, we're planning to achieve carbon neutrality. We are placing emphasis on enhancing energy efficiency, developing electric transport, and introducing modern solutions in agriculture and forestry. In Russia, 85% of the energy balance is already accounted for by clean, low-emission generation, first and foremost gas, nuclear power, and renewable sources. We are enhancing our own technologies and productive capacity to decarbonize various sectors. And of course, we use our natural resources. Our country possesses a fifth of global forestry resources, and the volume of absorption of carbon dioxide exceeds the equivalent of 1 billion tons. And President Putin has stressed that Russia is calling for the pooling of efforts to combat climate change. And here I'd like to highlight 4 priorities. Firstly, agreeing on a new collective goal for climate financing in the interest of developing states. We need to make support for them real and tailored to the conditions in which they find themselves. Moreover, the resources should be directed towards decarbonization of high-emission sectors as well. Secondly, it's important for the transition to low-emission energy to proceed without it being to the detriment of the development of low-income countries. It's not possible to use the problem of global warming as a pretext for discrimination, unfair competition, and artificial restrictions. There's also a need to introduce practical mechanisms for implementing international agreements. There's a need for a single system for assessing the quality of climate projects. And of course, we need to establish cooperation amongst the scientific communities. National research can replenish and clarify data on climate change on a global scale in order to ensure effective decisions for decarbonization and adaptation. Distinguished colleagues, Russia remains committed to low-carbon development. We are improving our legislation. We are extending voluntary assistance to vulnerable countries in the area of climate, and we are ready to continue such work in close dialogue with all interested states. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. This brings us to the end of our national statements for today. Distinguished heads of states and government, delegates, honored guests, the opening of the second part of the high-level segment will be held on Tuesday, 19 November, in this plenary at 10 o'clock in the morning. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP, and the CME adjourned.